I have been thinking to some objections people have to Christian nationalism, which seems to be a relatively recent phrase. And I think that the fundamental problem that people have with it is that in an era of mass migration and so on, Christian nationalism seems impotent. How can a Polish person prevent loads of Kenyans coming to Poland if they're all just Christians, and if that's the important factor, and the ethnic differences don't matter? There seems to be an inherent weakness. Whereas a pagan religion, which is specific to a pagan ethnic group, will always prioritize the existence of the ethnic group, and therefore it seems on the surface to be stronger. Let us consider some advantages that a pagan religion has over Christianity. So for the moment, let's assume that there's no divine power at all behind any religion. So then what's the purpose of having one? I think it's the difference between short-term and long-term strength. So you want your group to be strong in the long term, that is, through the generations and through the centuries. But if you're the chieftain or the king, or the elite of a tribe at any one moment, you might prefer for them to be weak. The weaker they are, the easier they are to rule. But if you make them weak, then in the long run that will be bad for them. So what a religion does is it establishes principles or operating procedures and puts them out of the hands of the actual people who are in charge of the group. So it means then that they cannot be corrupted, and so the long-term strength is preserved. Now that the operating principles are out of the hands of corrupt leaders, we can get on with optimizing it for our group to ensure its survival. So for example, if you live near the sea, then maybe your religion will say that you're not allowed to sail on it, because obviously sending lots of young men off onto the sea and then having them get killed in shipwrecks isn't going to be good for your group. Whereas if your tribe is further inland, it would never occur to them to have this prohibition. Or maybe you're somewhere where there's lots of food, so your religion might tell you to have lots of children, which would be an advantage over groups having fewer children. But if you were somewhere where the climate was harsher, then having too many children will lead to starvation, so maybe the religion puts a cap on it. And that works out just fine in that specific region. It becomes obvious, therefore, why Christianity would be a source of weakness. It's an import, so it cannot possibly be optimized for the people who are receiving it. It was made somewhere else by other people. It's optimized for somewhere else and for other people, so the chances of it working out just well here, in the north coast of Scotland or the west coast of France or the south coast of Spain, as opposed to Palestine, is as likely as getting a tailor-made suit, tailor-made for somebody else, to fit you. And even if we say that the Christianity is not optimized for the people of Palestine, and it's instead a universal religion, well, if it's universal, then it's still not tailor-made for any specific group, and therefore cannot possibly be optimized for them. And so the choice is between an optimized pagan religion and a suboptimal Christian religion. Well, the optimized religion should always be the best, surely. But history shows that Christianity overtook paganism, so how could this be if it was suboptimal and weak? I think there are a couple of possible solutions. The first is that, because it's a universal religion, it was possible probably to tweak it for the circumstances on the ground. So in times of war, you can use it to justify war, in times of peace to justify peace, and so on and so on. So therefore, the fact that it was universal meant that these different ethnic pagan groups could practice a different kind of Christianity wherever they were that was optimized for them. So it was still optimized even though it wasn't pagan. Another possibility is demographic. It could be that Christianity writ large was not optimal for the pagan society at large, but there would have been people on the fringes of that society who were not served well by the pagan religion, and perhaps coincidentally, Christianity appealed and was better optimized for them, just by sheer chance. And by chance, it was so well optimized for them that over time they simply demographically replaced all the other pagans. And so when people would say that Christianity was not optimized for pagans, really, we're not talking about the same pagans. The pagans for whom it was not optimized died out, leaving only those for whom it was. It could also be that Christianity, despite being universal, is actually optimized for a certain kind of society. Specifically, it is optimized to be part of a very powerful empire, which is civilized and prosperous and powerful. And so in that respect, it could be acting as a sort of a cheat sheet for how to have a powerful empire and how to conquer other people. And so when you introduce this cheat sheet to pagans who don't have an empire yet, it sort of kickstarts their rise to glory. But now we return back to our pole and our Kenyan. How do we get around this, even if Christianity is so strong? It doesn't seem obvious. Could it be that this was a bullet that Christianity has been dodging all this time, and that in principle there is no answer to it, but it was just, luckily, not something that ever came up before, and now that it has, Christianity is revealed to be too weak? I suppose at this point the question is not so much, can a Kenyan become a Pole? Because the Christian nationalists could say, of course. The question is the Kenyan trying to become a Pole, and why is he in Poland? And if the intent behind him being in Poland is hostile, so his purpose is not to become Polish but to replace the Poles until there are none left, this is clearly hostile and wicked towards the Poles, and therefore a Christian nationalist can oppose it. Even if he does not oppose in principle the idea of a Kenyan becoming a Pole, he can oppose in principle the intention to destroy the Polish people. Furthermore, the Christian nationalist does not oppose the idea that a Pole and a Kenyan are different. He might say that these differences can be overcome, and a pagan or anybody else might disagree, but for the moment the differences exist. And if the differences exist, then they were created. If they were created, then they were designed. If they were designed, then they have a reason, and if there's a reason, then there's an intent, or it's part of a plan. So any attempt to destroy these differences by replacing one group or both groups or mixing them out is to be contrary to that plan and the author of that plan. So therefore it's a Christian nationalist duty to oppose the destruction of these ethnic groups, even if Christianity is the most important factor. The fact that these other differences exist means they must be preserved. I can see why some people would look at Christianity and see it as a source of weakness, and that a better solution has to be found, and that the alternative should be the European pagan religions, because they're optimized for the European biospirit, and they have no trouble with ethnic or genetic in-group out-group. But I'm not convinced that Christianity necessarily has a problem with these either, and that it is the source of weakness that people claim.